Thor: The Dark World is not a good MCU movie, but it ends on a fairly brilliant note. The whole film redeems Loki in many ways as someone who can do good when put to the test. When his heart and soul are in it, he can do the right thing. The film's third act starts with Loki seemingly sacrificing himself in an attempt to avenge the death of his adoptive mother, of Thor's birth mother. But we know he's not really dead. We know this game by now. We know Loki's just hiding somewhere, and indeed he is. The film ends with us learning that Loki has replaced Odin and is impersonating him on the throne of Asgard. And no one knows. Thor doesn't know. The Avengers don't know. After 3 films of trying to take power, Loki has successfully seized it. And after trying to take over Earth for Thanos, now he has power over the 9 realms, over all of it, and no one knows. And with this power, Loki funds the arts.
It's an interesting play. What's it called?
The Tragedy of Loki of Asgard.
We live in a world where leaders are often not the people best suited for power. Power draws those who want to use it to benefit themselves, typically. True great leadership is usually forced upon someone who doesn't want the leadership but has to take the command themselves. But typically life doesn't work that way. We don't always get our best leaders. And fiction responds to this by putting the absolute worst people in charge of countries, cities, planets, universes, multiverses, etc. Comic books especially. Every so often, a supervillain takes over the world, and we see what the world would be like if they ruled. And sometimes it's not as bad as we thought, and sometimes it's infinitely worse than we thought. So I decided to take a handful of comic book villains who have at one point taken over a territory, either through elections or war or through some underhanded domination, to see who is the best at rule. This will not be every single villain who rules a territory. I mean, there's so many, but I chose a handful that I think are the best examples. This can include being a mayor of a city to multiversal conqueror. So, bit of a range, bit of a different circumstances with each one, but we'll see how it goes. Also, we're going to exclude characters who are just simply lords of all evil by default, so we're not going to have any Darkseid, Mephisto, Dormammu, just because it's kind of a cheat to kind of go, okay, the people who rule hell or the hell dimension would not be a good president. Like, yeah, obviously, that's not fun to discuss. Of all these, I don't think any of these guys should be leaders, with a couple exceptions, and we'll get to those at the end, where they wouldn't be as bad as where we start, is what I'm going to say. But we'll get to that. While this video is not sponsored, I do want to include a shout out to a GoFundMe. Frequent collaborator Jazzy Oliver and Ash, along with their housemate Steph, are trying to relocate currently, and their GoFundMe is in the description. If you could donate, it would go a long way to helping my friends trying to make sure they're in a safe location in the United States right now. So if you can do that, that'd be great. And on with the video.
There's only one thing wrong with our relationship. You always win. Tonight, that changes.
Now let's not kid ourselves right now. The Joker would be the absolute worst case scenario. The Emperor Joker storyline gives the Joker the powers of Mr. Mxyzptlk. And with that power, Joker reshapes the world to fit his own insidious, twisted view of reality. He turns the entire world into a massive parody of itself, though we do find out that he doesn't have all the power he thinks he does. For example, no matter how hard he tries, he can never permanently kill Batman because a small part of him always wants Batman alive for the chase, for the pursuit, for the hunt. So we know Joker isn't all powerful. But if Joker did rule the world, it would be absolute chaos. There would be no peace. There would be all the rules of logic and coherency would be completely tossed out the window. I don't think anyone is upset I put Joker as the absolute worst case scenario. By the way, does anyone remember the time that the comics actually put the Joker as an ambassador to Iran? That was a thing that happened, and it turned out as fantastic as you'd expect.
Forehand or backhand?
Yeah, the ambassador part, that was in Death in the Family. So I can see why some people forgot that detail. Something else that was a little more important happened there as well.
I think a lot about meteors, the purity of them. Boom, the end, start again.
Between Annihilation, Age of Ultron, Marvel's What If, and the comic book Age of Ultron, it's pretty clear that Ultron should never take over anything. Ultron's domination of anywhere is total and complete. It can very well leave all of reality a hollow, empty space without nothing in it, a void where nothing exists. It's telling that with many villains who seek destruction, like Carnage or Thanos, they don't seek out the entire secession of reality the same way Ultron does. For Ultron, dominating everything is the first step to eradicating it, leaving a cold, empty void where all is still. The best example of why Ultron should never be allowed to rule anything is the storyline Annihilation Conquest, which is the sequel to the original Annihilation arc, which focused on the supervillain Annihilus, who rules the Negative Zone, invading the universe and trying to conquer it. In Annihilation Conquest, Ultron takes advantage of the state of the universe following Annihilus's invasion, takes over a techno-organic alien race known as the Phalanx, and takes over the Kree Empire. Just immediately takes over the Kree Empire. From there, he tries to enact conquest over all reality. And it takes the Guardians of the Galaxy, Adam Warlock, just about every single cosmic hero in the universe to stop Ultron from taking over everything. His end goal would have been a universe that is completely under his domain, under his control, and utterly devoid of all intelligent life. It would be peace on a cosmic scale because everything that would exist would be completely under Ultron's absolute control. No free will, no will of your own, just a drone of a computer hive mind created by Hank Pym. Also, if you haven't read Annihilation, you really should. That comic is fantastic.
You don't have one of those, do you?
Red Skull is... Do we need to explain why Red Skull would be bad? I mean, listen, he is literally... He worked under Hitler. Like, he is a actual... real Nazi. Like, I'm just not calling someone a Nazi because whatever. He's an actual one. He's actually the Third Reich kind of nonsense. Like, even Joker said he was bad. Like, Joker turned against the Red Skull. This is a guy who other villains think of as too evil for them. There's a famous storyline, the Axe of Vengeance, where Loki assembles a bunch of villains and shuffles around who fights who and whatever. And when Red Skull enters the room, you got Doom, who's a Romani, you got Kingpin, who's a capitalist, and you got Magneto, who is an actual Holocaust survivor, all glaring at Red Skull as though asking, why are you even here? If you got Doom and Magneto going against you, there's a good chance you won't be in charge for very long, but Red Skull can unleash a horrible amount of damage in the meanwhile.
They've been told over and over that the future is leaving them behind, but I invite them to be relevant again.
The Sentinels have had multiple futures where they take over. And like Red Skull, they employ fascism. Raw, pure fascism, focused on systemic elimination. Mutant extermination camps are just the start. This is a complete Terminator bad future situation. Days of Future Past is one of the grimmest alternate timelines in Marvel. And even the present of X-Men 97, you have Bastard who comes in from the future and hollows out humanity, turning average people into sleeper agents. Yes, exploiting their bigotries to get that far, but that doesn't change the fact that he's willing to just scoop out the soul of a person to turn them into a living weapon.
After this, they wake up in their daily lives with no memory of ever being here. Maybe a mutant flirts with one of them at a local dive bar and...
That is the future that Sentinels want, and even the present of the X-Men, with Genosha, with Krakoa, with all these exterminations of a massive scale, of a brutal scale, the Sentinels are not interested in diplomacy. They're not interested in letting you speak your mind. They are interested in fulfilling their purpose, and their purpose is eradication.
Mutant! I am as far beyond mutants as they are beyond you.
Apocalypse, the first mutant, Ensabanneur. Apocalypse is an interesting case because he starts off overthrowing a dictator, that being Rama-Tut, who is another form of Kang the Conqueror. In Krakoa, Apocalypse has mellowed out somewhat. In recent years, Apocalypse has shown he is not pure evil. That doesn't change the fact, though, that Apocalypse believes in a society where the strong dominate the weak, where the weak are crushed under the foot of those with power. Age of Apocalypse is the other most famous bad future for the X-Men, and it's terrifying. It's a world where Apocalypse has broken down entire countries based on who the strongest in that country is and who he believes should rule. It's a world where everyone is twisted by trauma. It's a lawless Mad Max crossed with, it's bad. It's not good.
Watch me and tremble. I bring the purity of oblivion.
Apocalypse should never be in charge of anything, despite the fact that he believes he is the strongest and mightiest among all and thus should rule.
How do you know my name? Have you been to Krypton?
I am Krypton.
Brainiac will put your entire city in a bottle, just to stare at it, just to watch it. There's something so strange about Brainiac, right? Of course, he's, depending on which continuity you're talking about, he could either be a collector of cities or a robot AI that dominated Krypton and led to its destruction, unleashing an eternal war against the cosmos just to keep Kryptonian conquest living.
They were going to declare a ceasefire, and then where would that leave me? I was built for war.
My Adventures with Superman, I think, shows the worst case scenario, where Brainiac does dominate Krypton even after destroying it. This is a leader who will eradicate planets the moment it deviates from the desired outcome that Brainiac wants. Boom. Start again. Maybe not as total as Ultron, but very similar in that mechanical, focused perspective. And if that's not the case, then he is just dominating and controlling. At his best, Brainiac only values the information and knowledge of a civilization. He will quickly abandon something if it's collapsing, if it means collecting the data and scientific studies that civilization has produced. Its histories, its architecture matter more to him than the people that live within it. The Maker is a truly disturbing figure in comics. Ultimate Reed Richards was never a super stand-up guy, but loss and the weight of his personal failings twisted his mind into this undying, multi-dimensional threat, something that controls and rewrites reality. He creates multiple universes with the time he has, creating societies that employ eugenics to become perfect. He wants to rewrite reality during Secret Wars, and almost does if not for the efforts of Molecule Man and 616 Reed Richards. But it's what he does to Earth 6160, the new Ultimate Invasion storyline, that I think really separates the Maker from other villains. He travels through time to recreate a reality where superheroes don't exist, and when they do exist, he can control the circumstances entirely. What he does to that universe's Reed Richards is so cruel and so petty that it almost deserves a video just to discuss the sheer cruelty of the Maker's actions there. The Maker is chilling and monstrous. He thinks he's creating a perfect society, but he sees all of the subjects of that society as lesser than himself, a true God complex. Even then, he never applies the same cruelty of his standards for society to himself. So oftentimes, his subjects are left turning against him. This is a man who creates worlds that always revolt against him because the worlds he creates are so utterly under his thumb in a way that's cruel, demeaning, and soul-crushing.
Is this your king? Huh? Is this your king?
Now, this might be controversial, but yes, I am talking about the MCU version of Killmonger more than the comics version, because I think, A, more people are more familiar with the MCU version, and B, there's a discussion to be had online if Killmonger is the villain. He is the villain. He is a villain. This isn't a Magneto situation where, he's kind of justified what he's doing. No, Killmonger is the bad guy of the movie. I'm going to explain what people don't understand about Killmonger. Killmonger is tragic. His story is heartbreaking. He was abandoned by Wakanda. He was used by the US military as a weapon. His life was shaped by pain and trauma. And he was wronged by T'Chaka. the previous Black Panther. He is a victim of racial prejudice, and thus his actions to overthrow racist society, that's not the problem. The problem is he has no plan after that. Killmonger was trained to destroy systems of power. He was not trained to build them back up. He doesn't care about that. When he takes over Wakanda, he destroys the purple flower that gives the Black Panther their power because he doesn't really want there to be a future for Wakanda. He doesn't want there to be a future for anything. He wants short-term control so he can destroy and deconstruct systems, because that is what he was built into by the US military. He is ultimately not there to rule. He is there to destroy and leave nothing in its wake. He is there to melt the planet and leave a salted, dead Earth behind. That is not someone who should rule anything. And he is a worst case scenario, because after he drags your entire country into a never-ending war, he will just as quickly abandon you and salt the earth upon which you breathe.
I am calling an immediate, worldwide ceasefire. All hostilities will stop, or I will stop them. It's over.
The Justice Lords from the DC Animated Universe and Injustice Superman are basically dark visions of the future. What if the heroes who protect us turn against us? Well, for one, we'd probably all be dragged to a fascist future where the heroes become overlords that dominate with an iron fist. You can't commit crime, but it's because you have no freedom left. The Justice Lords form after President Lex Luthor, we'll get to Lex Luthor later, executes the Flash, resulting in a fascist overthrow of the government, where Superman kills Lex Luthor and assumes power and command over the world with the rest of the Justice League. In Justice, Superman seizes power after Metropolis and Lois Lane are destroyed by the Joker. The idea that the out-of-control criminal element has skyrocketed and become a real threat to cities and nations. Society at first cedes power because, well, these are trusted figures, they're beloved, and they have immense power. But soon, crime becomes punished by any means necessary. Small crimes can result in life imprisonment or even public execution. And those in power have no power in the face of gods among men. It's a future so disturbing that other dark Elseworld stories like Superman Red Son tease this kind of future as a nightmare scenario. Red Son ends with Superman being told, why don't you just put the whole world in a bottle? And that scares him, that shakes him. So Injustice Superman is what happens if Superman does put the whole world in a bottle, does take command over every facet. And while tragedy and pain do lead to this circumstance, it doesn't change the fact these are worst case scenarios. Even among dark futures, Injustice and the Injustice Lords, all that, it's a bad case for that.
In my time, I rule all. But a disruption in the space-time continuum destroyed my reality.
Kang the Conqueror is a conqueror. I know, shocking. He has several domains. As Rama-Tut, he ruled over Egypt as a pharaoh, only for Apocalypse to undermine him. He reigned over a future with a vast arsenal of weaponry. He and his council of Kangs reigned over lesser versions of himself. In Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, he even dominates the quantum realm after being locked there. He turns his prison into his own empire. But I think where we really see the worst case scenario for Kang is actually in the MCU's Loki series. He who remains has conquered his other variants. He has decided to dominate over time, creating systems of control to ensure that only one timeline exists. In effect, he annihilates a multiverse in order to control and simplify reality.
Hence, ages and ages of cosmic harmony, hence...
You're welcome.
Anything that deviates from the path he sets is destroyed, eradicated. The one above all is responsible for the passings of untold trillions, if not quintillions, of individuals. Yet, he sees himself as benevolent because he's taking care of the variants of himself that could cause more destruction, but in turn is creating more destruction than humanly believed possible. It's ultimately these systems of control that he establishes that makes him such a tyrannical nightmare of a character. He rules in a way that's truly, truly restrictive, in a way that you don't know. He is not a figure you can fight because he is so far behind multiple facades, there's something very disturbing about He Who Remains that I think a lot of fans don't touch upon enough.
Yes, Ganthet, a new command is at hand, a new authority.
How dare you! It's an affront to him!
Shut your mouth, you stupid little troll!
Sinestro is an alien who rules through fear. His home, Korrigar, is ruled by him with complete totalitarian domination. Oh, and by the way, that's before he creates the Yellow Lantern ring. He already is a fascist with the Green Lantern ring before becoming a Yellow Lantern. From there, he basically becomes a monster, destroying star systems in order to establish order.
In a galaxy screaming for order, you have cast a deaf ear, but all that ends now.
He destroys what he sees of as chaotic to instill an idea of complete control, where he rules through fear. Modern readers are probably most familiar with Sinestro thanks to the Sinestro Corps War, a massive storyline from the mid-2000s that featured Sinestro taking command of his own personal army, using cosmic entities such as the Anti-Monitor, or famous supervillains like Superboy Prime, or Cyborg Superman, or the Manhunters, in order to establish a hierarchy of new power, overthrowing the Guardians and establishing a new empire of terror. And much like the Injustice Lords and the Injustice Superman, it works. He creates systems where everyone bends to his will and is too afraid to step forward because he's just that much in control. Yeah, there's no crime because everyone's terrified for their lives. It's truly a nightmare scenario. This is not someone who you should let in charge. Yeah, oh yeah, there's peace, but only peace for who?
The next stage of my plans might be considered genocidal.
Vandal Savage is an immortal who, over the millennia, has donned many identities. He claims to have ruled over Sumer, been Julius Caesar and Genghis Khan, among others. He advised Napoleon, and oh yeah, he also advised Hitler. So, I mean, he's a man who's built empires, oftentimes crafted out of terror and destruction. He is a conqueror, much like Kang.
I've lived thousands of lives. I've been a laborer, a scientist, a priest, an artist, a healer, a thief.
But most often, a conqueror.
The only thing that maybe pushes Vandal Savage a little bit above Kang and a little bit above the others is that he often builds something in his wake. He sees the construction of the long form of history as a positive, that he's bringing some good. Yes, he's in charge, yes, he rules, but he sees himself more as a crafter of society.
To you, my warlords, I offer dominion over as much of what remains of the planet as each of you can hold, second only to me.
Doesn't change the fact he's created some of the worst fascist regimes and monstrous dictatorships in history, but hey, I mean, even if you're this high up, you still should be as far away from leadership as humanly possible. This is not a... Vandal Savage being this high is not a props to Vandal Savage. It's just, it's so much worse.
Grodd will complete his mission. Time to make America Grodd again.
Gorilla Grodd is a gorilla who rules over Gorilla City. He can mind control people, and he is a monster. He exploited the arrival of humanity into the Gorilla City as a means to seize power, and constantly tries to seize power. As seen in the recent DC animated series Creature Commandos, Gorilla Grodd is not above collaborating with other conquerors, lending his forces and might to another's cause. He's not a well-intentioned extremist. He doesn't have some grudge against humanity. He just wants to rule, and he'll throw his own gorillas out with the waste if it means having an ounce of more power. He is another monster. He's a conqueror, but he's also no more different than so many warlords who existed throughout history, with one key exception.
Barack Obama, it will almost be an honor to kill you.
He did try to attack Barack Obama.
Mr. Osborn, didn't expect to see you back tonight. And through the front door, no less.
You want to rule the world? You don't punch time clocks.
Forget Green Goblin, forget all of that. As a human being, Norman Osborn is a complete and utter monster. Norman Osborn exploited the Secret Invasion event to take over S.H.I.E.L.D. He turned Tony Stark into a patsy for the invasion and elevated himself to control one of the most powerful military branches in the country. He recreated the Avengers and Thunderbolts to be his personal army. And when he had all this power, he used it to launch a siege on Asgard itself. He is, ultimately speaking, a power-hungry capitalist monster. And he proves very unstable as the story goes on. He assembles what he calls the Cabal, a society of supervillains who he uses to instill global control. It's only thanks to his own arrogance and mental instability that he is overthrown at all, overreaching just enough to leave himself vulnerable to both the public's criticism and the heroes of the Marvel Universe's counterattack.
Even this wasn't enough for you, was it? You had to have it all. Now we're on the brink of a war that could destroy the whole planet.
Could have been so perfect.
Lex Luthor, in a lot of ways, is kind of similar to presidents that we've had in history, essentially. He is ultimately a self-serving billionaire who uses the presidency to solidify his own power. The difference is Lex Luthor does do a few things that does improve society somewhat. You're probably wondering how Lex Luthor even became president. Well, he started becoming more of a philanthropist, helping with Gotham City's rebuilding following the earthquake of No Man's Land. Of course, Lex was undercutting all attempts to rebuild Gotham in order to make sure he got the right to rebuild it and take all the credit for fixing Gotham. But still, he did ultimately help save Gotham by undermining everyone else's attempts to save Gotham. He became the president of the United States under an idea that he would share immense technology with the common person. He was going to put a flying car in every garage. While he did undercut all attempts to undermine his public image by murder and launching rockets into people's faces, he did ultimately do a few good things. But the big thing was the Imperiex War. He helped stop Imperiex during the Imperiex War. His actions to use the Suicide Squad in certain ways and collaborating with Amanda Waller does create a government-ordained peace force of heroes who do believe they're doing the right thing. That being said, of course, he's still Lex Luthor. He still sees himself as a man trying to become a god and trying to overcome who he sees as a godlike obstacle to do so. It's ultimately his pursuit for Superman that undermines his entire success as president. But he is ultimately stopped eventually. In a moment that I suspect partially is inspired by George W. Bush's real pursuit of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, Lex Luthor tries to blame Superman for a kryptonite meteorite that comes to Earth. And he also tries to pin a certain murder of Vesper Fairchild on Batman. Neither of these go well. The public doesn't buy it. Oh, and then it turns out that LexCorp sells all of its assets to the Wayne Foundation while he was divested from LexCorp's processes. So basically he gets completely demolished on the political and financial / economic level.
The city crumbles and fades. Needs to die before it can be reborn.
Of all the billionaire industrialists who become leaders, Wilson Fisk as the mayor of New York might be the least horrible because it's contained to New York. In the storyline Devil's Reign, Kingpin becomes mayor of New York and immediately outlaws vigilantism. He employs the Thunderbolts, much like how Norman Osborn did previously in the Dark Reign storyline, in order to control the New York City landscape to apprehend now illegal vigilantes. And mind you, this includes everyone from Daredevil and Spider-Man to Tony Stark. Now, again, in the Marvel Universe, some authoritative bodies have just tried to outlaw superheroes. A great example of this is the Superhero Registration Act following the New Warriors, causing a bit of a mass disaster. So it isn't that out of the ordinary for an authority to outlaw heroes. Further, using Doc Ock's technology, Kingpin does manage to suppress crime throughout the city. So again, he does create peace and doesn't seem to infringe too much on civil liberties in the process. If you ignore the fact that he takes the Purple Man's powers and mind controls people into obedience. But, aside from that, it's totally fine. He mainly uses the office to attack the vigilantes who undermine him. But he also is still a mayor of New York, and because of his vast resources in the criminal underworld, he creates the facade of peace by controlling his enterprises. Granted, he used the office to further enrich himself, yes, but the Kingpin does use this vast enterprise to some benefit, to become a leader with good publicity in many ways. He's a lot like Lex Luthor, except because he's on a smaller scale, he doesn't expose himself to the same countrywide problems that Lex does as president. The other benefit is, of course, that when Wilson Fisk is dethroned, Luke Cage becomes mayor instead and brings about actual reform to the city that, on a systemic level, does improve things. For some reason, in order to make something better,
needs to die before it can be reborn.
But even then, the Kingpin, if he did rule, it would not be a good situation. He is still ultimately self-serving, but he, throughout his various appearances, is known to do benefits for society in order to hide the fact he's such a criminal. What I'm saying is that because Wilson Fisk is so clever and so down to earth, mostly, he at least would know how to camouflage his criminal activities to make some benefit for society. We're at the top 3 now, and these next 3, I think, are the only ones who wouldn't be the worst possible cases. These aren't terrible, but they're not good either.
You are trespassing on Latverian soil. Leave. Now.
I bet you didn't expect to see Doom this low on this list. I mean, relatively speaking, it's still top 3, but I digress. Doom is the leader of Latveria, a benevolent tyrant whose people love him. Bast, the god of Wakanda, say that Doom, if he were in charge, could further the path to humanity's ultimate success, that the world might be better off under Doom's command. However, he's still a tyrant. The comics are kind of complicated with this, where sometimes if Doom is written in a way where he acts in a way that's overtly malicious or overtly destructive, the writers will say, oh, it wasn't really Doom that did that. It was a Doom bot. It was some other circumstance that led to Doom seemingly doing something, but he really wasn't doing that bad thing. Doesn't change the fact he's still a dictator in charge of Latveria. Doom is driven by pride. During Secret Wars, he even rewrites the whole of reality, and all of that is undone thanks to his grudge against Reed Richards. His grudge against Reed Richards is ultimately his own undoing every single time. Because of his pride, he undermines any possibility of success to attack Reed. But Doom is also not as evil as people would like him to believe, including Doom to his enemies. Doom still does want to benefit the world. In the process, he's launched invasions against Wakanda. In X-Men 97, he helps Bastion's plan to hollow out the souls of humanity in order to destroy mutants.
Do not mistake Doom's collusion as indifference to flagrant war crimes.
Next time I'll send memos.
Doom is still involved in the cabal with Norman Osborn. Doom, despite saying he wants to do better, is still willing to work with the most evil people alive. Even though he is Romani, he still works with Red Skull. Like, that tells you something, doesn't it? You're still going to work with someone who committed horrible atrocities against your people. But other side of that is that he'll do anything, no matter how terrible, in order to make the world a better place. So from Doom's perspective, every action he takes, no matter how terrible or how cruel, furthers 2 ends: to improve the planet and to get revenge upon that scheming Reed Richards. Okay, I'll stop.
I will bring you home, old friend. And I ask only one thing in return. Don't get in my way.
Magneto is complicated. Magneto ultimately wants one thing: mutant kind to be free of human domination. Whether that means conquering and destroying humanity, or finding a peaceful balance between humans and mutants, or just pure isolationism entirely, depends on the writer. Magneto, much like Doom, has been written in various different ways over the course of forever. The closest we ever get to Magneto truly ruling, however, aside from stuff like Krakoa, is the House of M storyline. In this alternate reality, Magneto does take over the world. He overthrows S.H.I.E.L.D., who's been funding the construction of Sentinels. He instills him and his royal family as the authoritative power of the world. And he did work with humans to do that, such as Carol Danvers. However, it comes at the cost of Xavier. And with Xavier's passing, Magneto does try to continue the legacy of Professor X. During Age of Apocalypse, Magneto becomes a freedom fighter trying to overthrow Apocalypse to instill a world where people can live freely. He sees that the world Apocalypse is built where the strong dominate the weak. That's a bad thing, and he tries to correct that. Oh yeah, and during that Acts of Vengeance storyline I mentioned at the top of this video, yeah, he's the one who puts Red Skull in the ground. Not Doom, not Kingpin, not Loki, Magneto. He locks him up in an underground bunker with nothing and leaves him there. I feel that bears mention. Magneto is not necessarily evil in every continuity. In fact, most of the time he's not evil. There are exceptions, of course. Ultimate Magneto, for example, reverses the poles of the planet and decides to cast everything into pure destruction. His idea of rule is purely to crush everything. Under the writing of Grant Morrison, Magneto becomes an even more pathetic bully, trying to squash and crush resistance. But he's also potentially a successor to Xavier, someone who does herald in an era of peace and happiness, only for someone else to ruin it, like with Genosha. The problem with Magneto consistently is it's inconsistent how much he wants to help versus how much he wants to get revenge on humanity. If it's a House of M storyline, that's still a better future than every single scenario we've mentioned so far. House of M is preferable to Lex Luthor being president. It's preferable to Ultron. It's preferable to Kang. It's preferable to anything a Vandal Savage ever did. So, again, the question becomes, is Magneto's rule necessarily a bad thing? At least we have better odds than anyone else. On a very small scale, Magneto still is better than almost all the villains we mentioned so far in terms of how they would function as leaders. With one exception. The single greatest supervillain who should rule over everything is Sauron. Yes, Sauron, the pterodactyl mutant guy who absorbs powers from the Savage Land. Personally, I am all for his policies of turning everyone into a dinosaur. I mean, forget curing cancer, forget all that. Why would you want to cure cancer when you can instead turn everyone into dinosaurs? Oh, wait, hang on. I read the wrong note. Let me try that again. Okay, this is the right one this time. There is one exception to this, and that is...
Come on. What did you expect?
Loki is constantly trying to do what he can to take command of Asgard, to take command of Midgard, to dominate everything. But at the end of the day, what does Loki really want to do when he rules? As we see with the MCU, apparently he wants to sit on a sofa eating grapes while funding the arts. Yes, he is very lackadaisical in his rule.
9 realms completely in chaos.
Yes, when he does rule in the comics, like in the Loki graphic novel, he's more sullen and withdrawn, more contemplating his ideas, punishing his immediate enemies. But he doesn't really have much of a long-term plan of dominion. He's more just, he wants to take it over, and then he'll manage it as it goes. Loki, throughout the comic book history, is presented as putting forward an evil face, becoming a portrait of wickedness. But often that portrait of wickedness is not aligned with what he really wants on the inside. Even different versions of himself, like with Kid Loki, exist at odds with his more dastardly schemes. Is he still a villain? Yeah, but there's nothing to indicate that Loki, when he rules, would necessarily be a bad ruler. If anything, he'd be a very middle-of-the-road leader. He probably wouldn't instill too much control on anyone other than those who try to overthrow him. And again, that's not a good leader, but in terms of the scale we're discussing, it's vastly better than almost everyone else, except for maybe Magneto and Doom, that we've discussed so far. None of these people should be in charge. Not a single one of them should ever control everything. But in the world of supervillains, Loki at least is interested mainly in basking in his own glory and leaving the other affairs to those he thinks are better qualified. To an extent. In the case of the MCU, maybe he has too loose of a rule, which is bad and not good. But again, that's still preferable. But even getting back to the MCU, I want to talk about the end of the Loki series, where Loki overthrows Kang to instill his own new rule as the god of stories. And in this one, he is a liberator who allows reality to go in different directions, to instill the chaos of choice, where before there was only the order of a singular direction. In that sense, he's able to open up the world to new possibilities, instilling freedom to untold levels than ever before. Chaos is not evil. Chaos is disorder. And with a lot of these leaders that we've discussed previously, these villains, they instill order on a massive scale. Again, Magneto is one of the exceptions to that, but the others instill such a strict order, it limits the freedom that you're able to embody and present. Loki is the only one who runs counter to that, who opens the door up to options, to choice of an untold level. That is what makes him a far better leader than almost everyone else in this list so far. Because if you give the option between choice and control, you will always want to leave the door open to the choice to live your life the way you want to live it. And that's why Loki wins this. So, there you go. Loki wins. He won something for once.
What is this? What is this, please?